Welcome back to the Diary of a CMO, the podcast where I sit with CMOs and thought leaders in marketing and related media, tech, and creative industries. We'll talk about how they got to where they are, strategies and life lessons we can learn from them to help build a career, business, and ultimately a life that we love. I hope you enjoy, and please subscribe. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Diary of a CMO. Today, I am joined by Jacques Burger. He's the Group CEO of the Up&Up Group, and he's a visionary leader who has played a very pivotal role in shaping the modern advertising landscape in South Africa. He co-founded is one of the founding team members at M&C Saatchi Abel before the recent rebrand. We'll get into all of that good stuff on the pod. And they are one of the most successful and respected agency brands on the continent. Under his leadership, the agency has grown into a powerhouse with a blue chip client roster and a reputation for bold, effective, and culturally resonant work. With a deep belief in the power of ideas and the importance of meaningful client partnerships, it has helped redefine what it means to build impactful brands in a rapidly changing world. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And I am so pleased to bring on Jacques Burger. Jacques, how you doing, man?
Hey, Tayo, thank you for having me. I'm great. Good to be on the show.
Great stuff. Just a bit of, just to give the guys a bit of a background. Just before we started, we spent about a few minutes trying to get our names right. And I'm sure people who are familiar with podcasting and these types of things, they know the drill. So thank you. I really, really appreciate you coming on board.
Fantastic.
I like to kick things off, with some sort of an intro. I tried the best I could, but I'm pretty sure I didn't do justice to what your portfolio and the achievements, the milestones, and the things that you have been able to accomplish and build, not just within the South African market, but across the world. And I'd like for you to introduce yourself. For those who are meeting you for the first time, how would you like to introduce yourself to them?
Mm-hmm. So I'm Jacques Burger. I'm a passionate ad man. I'm a lover and a huge fan of creativity and the power that creativity has in driving great commercial value, in helping to build better communities, to build success, to grow businesses, communities, countries, and continents. And so I'm a passionate supporter of creativity. I head up probably now the largest independent communications group on the continent, which is a massive privilege. We've got about 550 people in our group, spanning offices across Cape Town, Johannesburg, a satellite office in Amsterdam, and then a network of affiliates across about 27 South African markets. My journey to the world of advertising is an interesting one. I actually started out wanting to study medicine. Believe it or not, I had aspirations of becoming a plastic surgeon, which maybe was a hint at the creative ambitions, But fortunately, didn't pursue that career choice. But ended up studying law actually, and then following graduation, was looking to do a gap year, and I stumbled upon an ad that advertised a postgraduate course then run by the AAA in advertising and marketing, and I thought, well, this sounds like a gap year following law. And so I went and did that for a year, and the rest is kind of history. Absolutely fell in love with the process of creativity, which I think the best probably articulated by a gentleman called Ken Robinson, where he said his definition of creativity is original thinking, or the process of original thinking that adds value. And so absolutely loved getting into that world. Started off working at Ogilvy, got my first job at Ogilvy in Cape Town as a junior. As I said to someone, every possible word that kind of signaled junior and inexperienced got layered into my initial title. And spent the better part of a decade there, which was a wonderful experience and an absolute privilege working on some iconic South African brands, the likes of an Old Mutual, but in particular also Volkswagen, where I was very privileged to be a part of, what I still believe to be iconic South African communication that didn't just win a whole host of awards, but also, won hearts and minds of South Africans, and had that lovely texture of what I think is uniquely South African communication. Then headed to Australia, and headed up a WPP company there called the Campaign Palace. That certainly in its heyday was very well known as a boutique hot shop, creative hot shop globally. Did that for just over 2 years. Very privileged to work there across brands such as Heineken, Panasonic, Westpac, Target, and then headed back to South Africa to co-found M&C Saatchi Abel, where I've been busy for the past 15 years. Kicked off and founded the Johannesburg office, then moved more into a group role. We've added 6 companies to the group over the past 15 years, and then just as of last year, rebranded as the Up&Up group.
Wow, I was pretty sure I didn't do justice to your profile, so I have to apologize for that in my intro.
No worries.
Wow, this is incredible. Like I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, like this has been a one hell of a ride. This looks like over 20 years now, right? 20, 25 years or something.
Yeah, I'm going to show my age now, about 25 years.
Don't worry, we can never tell just by knowing how long you've been in the business. I've tried the maths. I'm not. I'm usually off.
I started when I was 12. If that helps.
Oh my goodness! All right, all right. So, wanted to study medicine, ended up studying law. Wanted to be a plastic surgeon. Indications of your creative. That was a very funny one, by the way, Jacques. Like, that was very funny. So I think that it will be interesting, especially for like some segment of our audience, to get a sense of, you know, how did you know, how did you know, like, this is for you in terms of the industry and the work that you started out doing within the industry? How did you know that this was for you, despite the initial, passion or whatever to do the things you wanted to do?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think some people are lucky in that they're born knowing exactly what they want to do.
Right.
I wasn't one of those people. So, as I said, kind of through this career journey, I had to figure it out. But I think that looking back now with hindsight being the perfect science, I was always interested in creativity. I was always a fan of art. Photography was a hobby of mine. And so I suppose, those were kind of early signs of being interested in creativity. I've always enjoyed the world of commerce and the world of business. And I think that, when I started my journey in the advertising and communication space as part of that postgraduate course, I think what landed for me all of a sudden was that it offered a beautiful fusion of these two passions and interests of mine. Because, yes, there's the creative aspect, which is kind of the one side of the brain, I suppose. And then there's the commercial aspect and the business aspect, which is the other side of the brain. And I think the two of them coming together presented a really unique career opportunity, I suppose, to stimulate those very diverse interests of mine and to actually look at how you could take something that seemed quite opposite, but bring them together in a way that is really powerful. I really enjoyed the diversity that creativity brings, where you kind of no day is the same, no challenge is the same. There's no formula. You don't have a production line that you can go, if you run it from A to B to C, yesterday you did it like that. And if you just do that again today, all will be well. And I think that is something that excited me. I embrace change. I enjoy change. I know it scares some people, but I think that's how you discover new things, and that's how you innovate, and that's how you grow, and that's how you stay fresh and relevant. So the extent also to which creativity taps into culture and zeitgeist and kind of community and the way people live, is also something that I find hugely interesting and fascinating. So I suppose it was when all those worlds started to come together for me, that I realized that this is a career that I would enjoy, and the privilege of working with teams that are incredibly diverse has been really, really special. So you've got these brilliant creative minds. You get to work with designers who craft beautiful things, but then you work with people in a strategy team, who literally split atoms. That's how clever they are. And you're working with data, and you're working with consumer behavior, and then you get to express that skill set across a host of different categories. So if I look at the Up&Up group right now, whether I'm spending time with a client like a Standard Bank, and we're talking financial services, and you're kind of talking life products versus investment products, and then you move across to MTN, and all of a sudden you're talking about connectivity, and you're talking about data, and so it goes. From there you have a conversation with PepsiCo, and you're in the FMCG world, and then you cut across, and all of a sudden I can talk about 4x4s and the new Lexus GX, and how wonderfully capable. And you get to solve all of these varied business challenges in service of facilitating your clients and growth as a business and as a brand. And so it really is a fantastically dynamic career choice and business to play in.
Yeah, interesting. You spoke about change earlier, in terms of, some people not really being comfortable with change and stuff like that. My wife has warned me to stop bringing her up on the podcast, but unfortunately, she's one of those she's one of those people who, like, she doesn't like change, and I guess, that kind of takes me into like this conversation about change, and I put it down because I know I want to talk about it much later, and in terms of how you manage that, especially with an organization as big as yours, over 500 people across multiple markets, and then you have to make certain changes, and how you kind of navigate that. It'd be interesting to get, one or two tips in terms of how you would what you would advise in terms of navigating change in that kind of environment. Maybe we should just get into it. What would it be for you? Like, what are like the nothing crazy, one or two, three things you think when it comes to introducing change into an organization of your size? What would you say are one, two, three things that leaders will need to pay attention to?
Yeah, I do think that the first important thing probably is a positive orientation around change. So,
Okay.
and change shouldn't be something that scares you; it should be something that excites you. And I think the way to enable that is to make sure that you create an ambition that the change is in service of, because change for the sake of change isn't necessarily productive. So having a North Star and having an ambition and something that you can rally behind and go, if I embrace change and I'm prepared to push myself out there to embrace kind of the new and the innovative world, and accept that change, that could get me to my destination. And if that destination is exciting and it's defined, that's hugely helpful. The other thing is, I think that you need a little bit of a system to manage change, because change can lead to chaos. So it is important to put some guardrails in place in terms of how do you navigate and manage those change. Kind of where are your outliers? How broad is the lane that you're going to travel on? When do you know when you're kind of risking falling off the cliff? How do you measure progress? How do you measure the extent to which you can take the challenge that the change bring and convert that into opportunity? And how do you track that so that you don't just end up in a continuous cycle of change that actually doesn't deliver any benefit? And then I think the biggest aspect around embracing change is probably to get comfortable with the idea of failure and making mistakes. And I think that's something that unfortunately is massively stigmatized, particularly in the world of business today, but it actually starts at school, where people kind of go, if I do something wrong, or if I made a mistake, that's seen as a bad thing, that's seen as being wrong. And the reality is that if you're going to embrace change, it means you're going to kind of push into new frontiers, and that means you don't always get it right. You don't have the perfect answer. People that are at the forefront of change, people that innovate, people that drive new agendas, often have wonderful stories about failure before they got to success. But unfortunately, I think we live in a society where failure is put up as such a as being wrong, and it's so stigmatized that people are so scared of it. And in fact, in a corporate environment, you probably get punished for failing. So people steer clear of that. And because they then do that, it means that change becomes this very scary thing. This kind of open, uncontested space, exploring that feels very risky. And so one of the big things from an organizational point of view that we try and do culturally is to encourage people to be comfortable with the idea of failing, to kind of go, if through failing you are moving forward, if through failing you are learning, if through failing it means that next time you might succeed exponentially, then that's not a bad thing. That's not a terrible idea, to get something to fail or to get something wrong. If you learn from it, and if you can pick up from there and take those learnings and build on it, then that could lead to actually a very positive experience and journey.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I think that the point you made about getting comfortable with failure, because it's the most I guess the embarrassment behind after really driving this change initiative, and then it fails, and then you are a bit embarrassed to, what, guys, it didn't work. Let's cut our losses and move on. So I think that these 3 points.
The business of creativity also has a level of subjectivity to it. 1 + 1 isn't always 2. Sometimes 1 + 1 can be 11. That's the amazing thing. That's the powerful thing about creativity. But because it's got that aspect of subjectivity, it's also hard to. You can't be as binary as you can be in other industries to kind of go, that's right or that's wrong. So you've got to create. You've got to create an open mind. And I think with that also comes the need for diversity in terms of how you build your teams, because I think that's the other thing that encourages people to be comfortable with change. If you can be with teams who think different to you, who have a different background, who view the world through a different filter, it creates a sense of comfort that there isn't a right way or a wrong way. There are different ways and different approaches, and actually sometimes when you put them together, you get to a better place. And again, I think to be comfortable with diversity of thought is a really powerful tool in helping you navigate the kind of uncertain territory of innovation and new and bold thinking.
Right. Wow, thank you very much, Jacques. Your first intro of yourself really touched on a number of things, and I'm trying so hard to get back to the show notes, but I keep getting reeled back. Earlier you were talking about building campaigns that have in terms of like the true texture of the uniqueness of South Africa, that building campaigns that are true to the cultural nuance and all of those things. I'm definitely going to talk about it because I know that later on I want to talk about your idea around your creative philosophy. So we'll delve deep into that. So let's just move forward now. Tayo, let's move forward. Okay. I think the next question, not my first, is regarding moving from starting a company to becoming an industry leader. In case I forget this, Jacques, please, I want to talk about the MTN win from this was last year, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was last year.
I'm actually, yeah.
Oh, interesting. Got it. I would love to talk about it for many reasons. So I'll get into it. But I wanted to ask you about going from startup to industry leader, starting an agency, building it into what it is today, not just within the South African market, but the rest of the continent and beyond. My question is that when you reflect on those early days of co-founding the company, what were some of the most pivotal moments that shaped not just the agency's direction, but also your personal leadership style? And feel free like you stated earlier, about being comfortable with failures. Feel free to share some of the wins, some of those early wins and early failures.
Yeah. Look, those early days were trying to find the right words here. Interesting times, perhaps. As I say to someone, sometimes it's good to go on a journey, not knowing what it will look like, because if you did know, maybe you wouldn't have gone on the journey. But when we opened the doors of the agency in 2010 in South Africa, a friend of mine in Australia and an old colleague, Paul Fishlock, he said to me, Jacques, he said, the one thing I can tell you, and he had started a very successful agency in Australia many years ago. And he said, the one thing I can tell you, starting an agency, is there will be many lows and many highs. He says, but the amazing thing about a startup is that it doesn't matter how far you go and grow beyond that startup, you can build it into a very successful group, a decade or two down the line. But never, ever will the lows feel as low as it did in those early days, and never will the highs feel as high as it did in those early days. And I found that to be so true, because you just, I suppose you have this hunger for it to succeed, but you've got precious little to hold on to. You don't have clients, you don't have much staff, you don't have money coming in, you've got expenses racking up. And so it was a very stressful time. I think that, what it taught me was really a positive orientation around life, and to look at opportunity through a positive lens. This belief that, if I believe it to be brilliant, and if I believe that we can succeed, and if I believe this to be an opportunity, it's quite likely that it will be one. So, kind of that sense of, I suppose, almost manifesting success. And I found it to be important, particularly in those early days, because, you face so many headwinds, and without a positive attitude and a sense of resilience, you can't get there. I remember one of the early clients that we won was a client that made condoms. And we were hugely excited. I mean, we thought this was going to be the Durex of the future. That's positive thinking. A small little startup with a very strange product offering, which I don't need to go into the detail of, but you kind of hit that moment and you get excited and you're optimistic. And then 3 months later, that company goes bankrupt, and they owed us, kind of more money than what we'd arguably made in 3 months' time. So you get these big hits that come your way as well, and you step back from that and it's easy to lose faith. So, the way to cut through that is to maintain that positive spirit. I think the resilience that it taught me in those early days was unbelievably important. Also learning that, you've got to work for your success. I think that, when we started the agency, we thought that because of the equity that sat in the co-founders as individual brands, that a whole lot, we just needed to open the doors and people would come. And soon we realized that, you've got to do some work to transfer your personal equity into the brand that is the agency, because people would look at you and go, yeah, I quite like you and I used to work with you. That's brilliant. But this agency, never heard of it. And so, I think that there's a big learning there in terms of kind of, you can't just build your personal brand. You've also got to build the business as a brand. And then I think that, the power of relationships, both internally and externally, is so important. If I look at the co-founders, if I look at the team around us in those early days, even though times were sometimes tough, we had a huge amount of fun. And doing it together with other people who have the same ambition, who's in the same boat, who have your back, where there's no politics, there's no hierarchy, that's incredible. And then, I suppose a number of things that happened in those early days where we kind of had what I'd call our David and Goliath moments, where you go out to bat as a small little startup and you win a significant piece of business, and all of a sudden it just changes your fortunes. Paul Fishlock, who I referenced earlier, he once said to me in Australia, the best way of creating a winning culture is to just actually win. And it's so true. And so, Heineken was one of the first clients that I think very bravely and boldly signed up with us when we were very small. But they said, you know what, we'll take a chance on you. And then we pitched the Edcon account. I think we were about 10 people at that point in Joburg, pitching against 3 or 4 of the other biggest agency groups in the country that literally had like hundreds of people. And we won the business, which was crazy because we had to like upstaff and upskill almost overnight. But those were pivotal moments that kind of really shaped and changed who we were. But if I look at the learnings from those early days, yes, it's almost, and I'd like to think that we've maintained that what I call naive optimism, where you go, the optimism doesn't always translate into the reality, but you almost need to be a little bit naive about it. But if you see the glass half full, then there's a high likelihood that there will be some water in the glass. It might not be quite half full.
Yeah, absolutely.
There'll be some water in the glass. So I think that, and then picking, my other learning there was pick the right team. Make sure that you've got people around you who support you, who share your ambitions, and most importantly, who share your values. Because it's easy to navigate business and relationships in good times because it mostly takes care of itself. But it's when you face the headwinds that you need to know that you've got people who have your back. And as I said, both internally and externally. So it was also a learning around the importance of building powerful client relationships. People that you could really establish strong levels of trust with, which I think is actually one of the key foundations that you require in delivering creative excellence to brands and businesses.
Wow, that's amazing. I can only imagine, like in those early days, especially on a personal level, money isn't coming in. There's a family to take care of. There's bills to be paid. Sometimes, those moments are hellish, and to see what the company has become today, it's really, really remarkable. Speaking of what the company has become today, the Up&Up group, let's talk about that transition, with the recent buyback and rebranding to the Up&Up group. What motivated this move towards this, sort of full local ownership? And how does it align with your vision for the group going into the future?
Yeah, I think that we've always had an amazing relationship with our parent company, the M&C Saatchi Group globally, and I've always said, it felt more like a friendship than a partnership in many ways, which was phenomenal. But I think we got to a point in 2024 having conversations with them where we understood that, as much as we're part of this group, we're also very proudly South African and we're very proudly African. And for us, it was important to look at how we were able to execute our business on a day-to-day basis in service of that. And there are 2 tenets to it. The one is our people, and to go in terms of the people that actually work in our group on the African continent. How can we deliver the best possible opportunity for them in terms of growth, in terms of wealth generation, in terms of transformation, and then looking at our clients and understanding that whilst we're privileged to work with both iconic local South African brands, but also some international brands, where we conceptualize and execute and where we play is on the African continent. And we felt it was important that, we are structured as a business in a way that mirrors the ambition of our clients. And our clients all have Africa ambition. That's their playground, that's their focus. And so for us, the management buyout really, I suppose, was less about a divorce from M&C Saatchi, and I'll talk a little bit about the relationship that we have with them currently. But it was much more about looking at, how does the opportunity to be 100% locally owned help us to empower our staff, help us to create exciting journeys for them? How does it allow us as a group of agencies to really mirror what our clients' ambitions are on this continent? So we're not driven by a global agenda or, what an acquisition opportunity in New York might look like, because it's largely irrelevant to our clients on this continent. So that local focus to our clients and their challenges is something that was an important consideration for us around the management buyout. And I suppose to be able to strategize and focus on South Africa and on the African continent. was something that was significant to us. And then, I think increasingly it certainly is a word that I hear often in client conversations, and it's this little word called agility. And our ability to show up and make decisions in the moment, and to sit in a boardroom table across our clients and be able to negotiate and make a call, right there and then, not having to wait for an answer from a head office on another continent or in another country, I think was another consideration factor. But because of the relationship that we have with M&C Saatchi as a group globally, and the benefit that we've always enjoyed in terms of being able to I suppose, tap into best practice across different markets, both from a talent and an insights point of view, we've maintained our affiliation with the group. So we remain a very proud affiliate of the M&C Saatchi Group globally, and we are still their representation, and we represent their footprint on the African continent. So in many ways, for us, it's been a remarkably exciting journey, because I think we get to better deliver to the ambitions of our people, our clients, but we still maintain that international connection. And I suppose then, as a result of that MBO, we thought, okay, well, we need a rebrand to signal that moment. And as you can imagine, actually quite tricky, because often clients brief us on new names and new brands, and all of a sudden we had to do it for ourselves, and we're kind of the client and the agency. It was an interesting experience, but we kind of landed on this idea of Up&Up because I think it talks to a little bit what I referenced around that entrepreneurial spirit when we started the agency, but it talks to optimism, which I think is very much in our DNA. It talks to opportunity, and it kind of talks to the idea of being open. The idea that we're open to different points of view, to fresh ideas, and I think it signals momentum. That sense of you're on the up and up. So we really liked that as a name. It kind of encapsulates a lot of our values and our behaviors that hopefully people that work within the group and our clients feel and experience when they engage with us.
Wow, that's an interesting story. That's a very interesting story. I can't help but it's just as an entrepreneur myself, like the being able to experience that moment, of making that decision, seeing it come into fruition, and having what the group is today. I can only imagine the amount of, to some extent, fulfillment that it gives yourself, Mike, and the rest of the guys who are, foundational members of the team and the management. So congratulations to you guys. It might be a bit late in the day, but congratulations to you guys.
Thank you
I
very
wanted
much.
to.
It's exciting, sometimes a bit scary, I won't lie.
I can imagine. I can imagine. I can imagine. I can imagine. I wanted to ask you about what is called the traditional agency business model. I have my definition of when people say traditional agency business model. And there's this sort of school of thought that believes that the traditional agency business model is dead. Might be a bit doomsday-ish, but I guess it is a sort of a challenge to legacy businesses within the industry to sort of rethink the business model that they take to market. And I wanted to get your take on that. What for you? What's your take on it? Is the traditional classic agency business model, is it dead or alive? Is it dying? And how should agency owners, agency leaders think about their offerings and how they sort of satisfy their client and so on and so forth? What's your take on this?
Very interesting question, and I think will lead to probably quite a layered conversation. I mean, my starting point would be to ask you what your definition is of the traditional agency model, because I'm not sure that there's, we're singing from the same hymn sheet necessarily where that is concerned. But I think that, actually, I think media is probably a good space to start. When TV came along, everybody said radio's dead. it's the end of radio. If you look at radio, and then the internet came, and people say TV is dead, and now you look, and nobody will watch TV anymore because everybody's watching YouTube, But you look at the success of a business like Netflix, and you go, "What do you mean TV is dead? It's absolute rubbish." Radio is probably, kind of more active in many markets and more successful than it's been for decades. But but you ask yourself, so why is it? Why did it survive? Why wasn't radio
Right.
dead when TV came
Right.
in? And I think it was because as a medium, it reinvented itself, and it said, what are we really about? And we're kind of in a new competitive landscape, and that forced radio as a category or as an offering to kind of rethink its proposition and reframe the value that it brings. And in doing that, and as is evidenced by the likes of a Netflix, I think there is an opportunity to grow and to really thrive. So, when I hear people saying agencies are dead, I'm going, yeah, agencies that haven't evolved are probably in a heap of trouble. And when I look at evolve, I kind of think that there a number of considerations there. The first one is to understand the complexity of touch points that we're dealing with today. Kind of from a digital perspective, from a PR perspective, activation, all your traditional above the line channels, that's become hugely proliferated. And that means that the type of outputs that you need to deliver has shifted and has changed. Audiences have become more fragmented. But I think most importantly, possibly, is the access that we have to data and measurement has significantly changed the ad game. I remember a time where, it was deemed to be a successful ad campaign if the CEO's wife liked the ad. The end. Whether it delivered sales or growth was immaterial. You lived or died by whether the CEO's wife liked the ad. Sometimes I wish I could bring that back, actually, because sometimes I think what the CEO's wife thinks, she is the audience, not a bad metric. But
Oh,
I
God.
think agencies have had to evolve in terms of becoming a lot more accountable for output. In terms of the commercial return that gets delivered. And I think agencies that have not done that and have not embraced smart thinking and strategy and data are at risk of falling behind. And I think it really talks to, I suppose, the shift from creativity for creativity's sake to creativity in service of growth and some key commercial metrics. And so once you in the business of solutions powered by creativity versus just creativity, I think then we get to a model that is more sustainable. The interesting thing, though, is in some ways, if I go back to those early days of, as you call it, the traditional agency model, I think in this whole evolution, we've potentially lost a little something. And going back to some of those early days wouldn't be a totally bad idea. Maybe it's about finding a hybrid model. And what I mean by that is that the obsession with metrics and what we can measure and return on investment has become a bit of an obsession. And we see a lot of it play out in the performance media space. And so we've spent a lot of time building metrics. And now when I look at it, I kind of go, I'm not sure that we're measuring the right things. And creativity to an extent has almost fallen by the wayside. It's like we have fallen into the world of research and marketing science. And the magic and the illogic sometimes that comes with creativity is missing. And I think that the industry, to an extent, has abdicated a little bit of its responsibility to hold creativity up high as a superpower. It's quite interesting when you look at, where creativity has found a home in other industries. You take the tech industry and the media industry, look at the likes of a Google and a Meta. You see a lot of industries outside of advertising now flexing creative muscle, because I think the world has cottoned on to how important creativity is. And I think we as an industry perhaps have pushed that to the side a little bit in favor of measurement, in favor of data, in favor of segmentation. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to bring creativity back in, and lots of interesting conversations and case studies, certainly that I've seen over the past 18 months, that are starting to build very, very powerful arguments to get us back to a world where creativity and brand building and long-term brand building and creative initiatives are being appreciated again, and where we're able to start to demonstrate their value. And so that hopefully that gets us to trade out of this kind of short-term world that we're in, which is all about performance media and short-term and delivering, the daily results and the sales, and to actually start looking at kind of what is a slightly longer-term view again in terms of how we build proper brand equity, where I say to someone, like where people go, I actually love this brand. I actually love this business. I might not buy your product today, but I possibly will buy it tomorrow or next year. And kind of short-termism is one of my bugbears at the moment, because I think that the world is caught up in that we're in this world of instant gratification. Everything's got to happen today. Everything's measured today. No one's in a job for more than 10 minutes. And so that means that everybody only cares about this year and the results for this year, because next year that exec team probably won't be around. So they don't care. Their bonuses are not dependent on that. But I think what we're losing out on is the ability to continue building equity in the long term. And I think what we're starting to see is the commercial benefit of that being evidenced. So I hope that a little bit of the Mad Men era of agencies, when creativity was the hero, that we can get a little bit of that back. So I suppose, it's about evolving, and it's about a new model, and it's measuring. But I wouldn't mind a little bit of that traditional agency madness coming back in. I think that one of my co-founders always says, when you come to the agency, it shouldn't feel like maths on a Monday morning at school. It should feel like double art on a Friday. And sometimes I think we've become a little bit, too maths on a Monday and not enough art on a Friday.
Oh boy. Oh man. Thank you for that. Thank you for closing with that analogy. I think we can speak a bit more about creativity, because you are right. Like it's not in the best state right now. Whether on the continent and the rest of the world, especially with the influx of generative AI and everything around that conversation. But I wanted to talk to you first about creativity and some of the things that I have seen as, that I would consider your creative philosophy, or that of the Up&Up group. One of the phrases I've seen, and I think is also on your profile, is brutal simplicity of thought.
Yes.
And I can't help but to ask you that, how does this principle guide your creative process? And can you share some examples where simplicity, led to a real breakthrough idea?
Yeah. So I think that unfortunately, we live in a world today where we suffer a massive attention deficit. Nobody pays attention anymore. I think social media has got something to do with that, because everything is condensed into bite-sized bits of content.
10 seconds, 15 seconds.
Shortened our concentration span. In fact, someone said to me the other day that apparently a goldfish now has a longer concentration span than the average human, which is pretty scary. And I've seen research done by a lady called Dr. Cara Nelson-Field, who tracked, I think, 130,000 online ads across more than 1,000 brands in a study. And they looked at a 2.5 second threshold, which is basically to say, if I can't keep your attention for at least 2.5 seconds, that message wouldn't have docked. So it actually doesn't even matter if you like the brand or if you like the piece of communication. It's just wastage. And 85% of those 130,000 odd pieces of digital content that they've tracked didn't get to the 2.5 second threshold. So that's pretty scary. And I think that, that's where, for me, brutal simplicity of thought comes into play, because it is about looking at what are the only possible words, what is the sharpest message I can land with you? Because ultimately, from a marketing point of view, I've got to inspire you to think, feel, say, or do something different. I can't do more than that. Those are my 4 available options. But in order to do that, I've got to tell you a story about my business, my service, my product, my brand, that's going to convince you to consider me, that drives preference, that drives conversion. Somewhere you've got to go, I've got a need state or a want, and the story I'm telling you as a business has got to match that. And then hopefully the way in which I'm telling that story also drives competitor preference, because, as I said, the world would be a far easier place if there were no competitors. I just needed to figure out what Teo wanted, and then I'd tell him that this is what I can give you. But now there are other people trying to do the same thing. So And because you've got a concentration span, less than a goldfish, I've got precious little time to tell you that story. And Brutal Simplicity is about looking at the complexity of the brand, the competitive landscape, the audience, and to go, how do we strip away everything that's not relevant? There's a beautiful story of a lady who walked through a craft market, and she saw this man, and he had carved these beautiful wooden elephants. And she questioned him, and she said, "These are works of art. They're absolutely exquisite. Well, where do you even begin carving out these beautiful elephants?" And he said, "I simply take a piece of wood and I cut away everything that doesn't look like an elephant." And I think that's kind of a beautiful articulation of the principle of brutal simplicity of thought: is how do you strip away all of the peripheral information, experience, nonsense that ultimately isn't going to change or shift behavior? And how do you get to, ultimately, if you can, the one word that you go, that is what this brand is about. That is what we stand for. Because that is what allows you to really quickly connect with your audience. That is what allows you to drive distinction in terms of brand, in terms of messaging. I think that if I look back at a business like the Takealot Group, where we were involved and partnered that brand since inception, when it was a little business called Take Two, that we selling DVDs out of a garage in Belleville. And at the time you had the big Kalahari as an online retailer,
Right.
where we rebranded and we said, why take two when you can take a lot? And I suppose as part of that rebranding journey, one of the things we did is we looked at the category and we said, what is it that will get us to win in this category of e-tailing? And at the time, what we identified was that the biggest stumbling block in e-tailing at the time was not meeting the need of instant gratification. So if you ordered a book on Kalahari, you'd have to wait like a week or 2 weeks for that book to be delivered. And so we said, if we could solve the challenge of instant gratification in the world of e-tailing for Takealot, if we could just do that one thing,
Right.
it would change their fortunes. And so we had a brand in our stable that we worked with called Mr. Delivery. And we had a conversation with them and we said, what do your drivers do between, I'm sure they're busy lunchtime delivering food and dinner, and then for the rest of the afternoon? And they said, well, it actually is a bit of a problem because they just kind of hang around. And we said, well, not for much longer. And so we introduced Mr. Delivery to Takealot, and in that way created a distribution network that allowed them to get products into the hands of people within 24 hours, sometimes same day. And that's the kind of creative solution that fundamentally changed that business and its growth trajectory, to the point where you then saw the Kalahari fade away and Takealot actually becoming the hero brand, and and effectively building e-tailing as a category in this market. For me, that's a beautiful example of brutal simplicity of thought. When you go, let's understand the very core of the challenge that you face, and then look at how do we solve for that.
I think, first off, that was definitely brilliant, and I think it ties back to the point we were making earlier about how agencies need to think about their solutions today. Is that it's about business outcomes over output, business outcomes over creative outputs, and that's the case here. Because I'm thinking to myself, the traditional agency would not have thought about solving the delivery problem, going as far as having a conversation with a partner, getting the partner interested, bringing them to the table, designing that solution, and then using creativity to really skyrocket the whole thing. I think that was a perfect example. I want to talk to you again about, I think it was on the Wheeling and Able podcast. I think you mentioned something about finding, I think it was about finding opportunities in challenges. Is this thing I refer to as, I think I saw it somewhere, I can remember, is the promise of a problem, is being able to find creativity, rather find opportunity in challenges. And I'm curious to hear from you, how do you cultivate that mindset on with your team, especially spread across multiple markets? How do you cultivate the mindset of finding or opening up their minds to finding opportunity and challenges? How do you cultivate that kind of mindset on the team?
Yeah, I think that, first is to develop a culture that orientates around usefulness and value add. So I always say, if a client comes to you and there isn't a problem, what value could you add? If there's nothing to solve, then how are you adding value? How are you shifting? How are you getting me to be better off today than I was yesterday? You've got to build some up and up trajectory or momentum or level of improvement, and in creating that I suppose improved position, there always has to be an understanding of what the challenge is at heart, because that's the value that you add. That's how you come in and solve. That's how you come in and build. So I think that one of the things that is really fantastic is when you start to exercise that process of interrogating a problem, fixing it, solving it, and driving that upside. It's incredibly rewarding, firstly, and it becomes quite addictive. So I always say, just try it, and that's a really good starting point. I think the second thing is to, as I said earlier, to get people to not be afraid to explore, to innovate, to fail forward, because I think often what people do is they go, I don't want to solve a problem because I'm afraid I might not have the answer, or I'm afraid that the way in which I solve it might not be right. And if you liberate people to go, you know what, if you don't try, no one will solve that problem and it will remain unsolved. So, you can only be better off. The client can only be better off. The brand can only be better off for you trying. And I think the other important building block in getting people to embrace the challenge of a problem and the opportunity that sits in that problem is to embrace team dynamics and to go, let's do this together. Because if we put our heads together and we apply that diversity of thought principle, we in it not alone, but as a collective. And when we do that, our opportunity and the likelihood of solving that problem becomes exponential. And then, as I said, I think the reward that then comes from that solution, the success that comes off that, when you watch your client's business grow, when you watch their brand equity tick up, when you get to see the work that we do, and when you see that being awarded, that's massively rewarding. When I worked in Australia, there was a dinner where a client of ours was at, and they were seated next to someone at the dinner, and this person said, I've got this challenge, but I kind of don't know what to do with it. And our client said, you know what? If you've got a problem that you don't know how to solve, take it to the campaign palace. They'll be able to help you. And I think that's such a I absolutely loved it at the time. And that's what I encourage people to embrace, is to lean into that usefulness and the ability to add value and to go, you can make a difference. It's the power to change someone's mind is unbelievable.
Incredible.
If I can fix a problem in a way that I can change the way you think about a product or a service, dare I even say right into a political landscape, and that's incredibly powerful and massively rewarding. And so, it really is about cultivating an easy and open environment for people to have a go at trying to solve those problems. Because the minute they start solving them, that reward kicks in, and then you just want to do more of it.
You've spoken extensively about, well, maybe not extensively on the podcast, but this about reclaiming creativity. Sort of ensuring that creativity maintains or retains the center stage, of the work that the agency does. How can agencies do that? Because again, on one end, we're kind of challenging agencies to think about solutions, to think about business outcomes, to think about all of these things. How can they, in this sort of new world, still ensure that creativity remains at the forefront of the work that they do?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a particular passion of mine, because as I said earlier, I think we risk as an industry losing our creative edge to other industries and categories, which would be a shame, because It is our superpower after all. I think the starting point in protecting our creative DNA is to ensure that you bring substance to support the creativity. And that's really about strategic smarts. It's about data. It's about audience understanding. It's kind of going, how do you take this idea and you make it easy and unterrifying, if that's even a word, for a client to buy? How do you have the substance of data and strategy and smart thinking that supports creativity? Because outside of that, it just becomes subjective opinion.
Right.
Do I like it or do you like it? That's a very hard argument to have. And it's also a very scary space to be, particularly for clients, because, I've got no parachute. I'm jumping out of this plane and I've got no parachute. It's terrifying. Will it work or won't it work? Bringing substance to the game is a great way to support creativity. I think the second thing is to look at, how do you build measurement into the game of creativity? How do we measure what's working, what's not working? Because that gives us an opportunity to optimize. That gives us an opportunity to grow and to learn, not just from our successes, but also from our mistakes. And you then build that journey towards greater creativity. And I suppose the third component, which is incredibly important, is trust. And that really is about how you build powerful relationships. If you have the trust of your clients, and if they respect what you do because of the substance that you bring, because of how you measure, because of how you shine creatively, if you've got that trust basis, everybody feels more comfortable to push the boat out, to be a little bit more brave, to be a little bit more bold. So that trust component becomes incredibly powerful and important. I think that we are making great inroads as an industry, as I said earlier, to prove the commercial value of creativity, which is fantastic, and I think an important building block. Then I think that we've got to continue investing heavily behind creative talent, and we've got to look at how we build a culture that allows that creative talent to have a level of freedom and a level of madness, as I said earlier. I think that's incredibly important. I don't think we want to be so constrained by data and measurement that you don't have an opportunity to flex. A wise person once said, we're in a world where logic is totally governed, and everybody supports logic. We've got all these rules and laws, but who's fighting for creativity? You've got an entire police force making sure that we stick to the rules, but who's fighting for that little bit of madness? And if you look at the great inventions, in fact, referencing that beautiful Apple ad from the 90s that says, here's to the crazy ones, because the ones that believe that they're crazy enough to change, crazy enough to believe that they can change the world are the ones that actually do. And if you look at the people that are featured in that ad, whether they be artists or scientists, there is a little bit of illogic, there is a little bit of madness in all of them. And I think we've got to try and find that balance again.
Interesting. Wow, thank you very much. Oh man, I mean, for those watching or listening, this is already about an hour already, and just for context, we just finished I think I'd say maybe the third section of questions, and we've got another 2 or 3 to go, but. We're going to have to cut it short at some point, just so that this doesn't, because this could easily go on for another hour. I want to talk to you about, market dynamics and partnerships. People have had all sorts of different experiences, but I don't want to talk about the more sort of EQ side of that conversation. I want to talk more about the IQ side of it. And the first question I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to Pan-African collaborations, with your presence on the continent, you've got some partnerships in some markets, whether it's Nigeria with SONU and the likes. How do you ensure cohesive brand narratives across multiple markets? This is a conversation that I wanted to ask someone who is in the creative business. I have asked, CMOs, I've asked the business leaders, but I want to ask someone who is in creative business. How do you ensure this cohesiveness or cohesion of brand narrative across diverse markets?
Yeah, I think the starting point really is respect. mutual
Mm,
respect.
mm,
I
mm.
think a big challenge that we have on this continent, particularly through the South African lens, I think a lot of people see this continent as two countries, South Africa and Africa. And of course, we know that that's not, and it's particularly viewed like that by South Africans, unfortunately. And I think that what one can never fail to understand or realize or appreciate is the nuance that sits in each and every one of these countries. We're not don't have one country as Africa. That's a continent. And as you probably know, Nigeria is a completely different world to what Ghana is, to what Cote d'Ivoire is, to what Uganda is. You've
Absolutely.
got different cultures, you've got different economies, you've got different behaviors, and so the starting point has to be respect in terms of how you roll this brand, how you roll any brand out or execute across these markets. A respect for the culture, a respect for the audiences, a respect for your partners in those markets, but it cuts both ways. So, as an agency group operating across markets, where to the likes of an MTN, you have to roll out one brand across multiple markets. It is about that mutual respect. So it is as much as me in a group role understanding the nuance and respecting Nigeria as a market as it is Udemy at SONU, respecting my group view and the need
Right.
for consistency and
Right.
the need for quality. I think with
Right.
that mutual respect then comes the need for aligned ambition. What is the North Star? And that has to be in service of the business. It has to be in service of the brand. It has to be in service of that success. It's not in service of SONU or in service of Up&Up Group. I think that's very important. And then I think that one needs to understand how you build a brand in terms of a brand idea, a brand concept, a brand execution, and understanding that it isn't a one size fits all model. And
Right.
sometimes you look at a message and you go, that message is a human truth. And it applies as much to a Ghanaian as it applies to a Nigerian, as it applies to a South African. And so you can stretch that, as a single message across those markets. You might find that you could even run it all the way through to execution. But sometimes you go, no, actually, we need a different execution in a
Mm,
Nigerian market. And then back
mm.
to that respect, you've then got to go, okay, but who are the best people to execute a message for the Nigerian market? Arguably, someone working and living in Nigeria. And so it's about how we maintain that balance. And then I think
Right.
it's appreciating that we're not in a perfect world. And so it's about open, ongoing channels of communication. It's about reviewing. So it's not just trying to catch it before the work gets executed. Sometimes it's going, where are we at? What does this brand look like? How does it feel? What's the work that we've done over the past 6 months? What's the work that we've done over the past year? Where are we falling down? Where are we missing a beat? So I think that, it's applying this principle of apart and yet apart. The brand needs to be one, but sometimes it needs to show up with slightly different flavors in these markets, and it is a balancing act, and there's no perfect formula for that. Um, we'd like to think that with trust, with respect, and with powerful partnerships, where we're aligned to the ambition in terms of servicing a brand, and understanding the power that comes with a consistent brand supported by relevant and resonant messaging and expression that lands in that market. I think when you understand and respect that dynamic, it leads to really powerful relationships.
Fantastic. Speaking of MTN, let's go beyond the pitch now. This. I mean, come on, like MTN is having a pitch. I'm sure almost every agency group wants to be on that roster. You get what I mean? So, um, for such a competitive, fiercely, competitive pitch, what would you say? Yeah, because I'm sure, like as a result of the winning the pitch and being agency and record and so on and so forth, I'm sure you've gotten the feedback from the client and also just based off you as a leader within the team. So, what would you say was the reason? No, not the reason. How did you win? Like, how did you win this? Do you get what I mean? Like, I guess that's the most layman way to ask you. Like, how did you win this?
Maybe I should ask the client. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder. No, I think that a couple of things. Firstly, I think that our philosophy of brutal simplicity of thought served us very well in the pitch. When
Say
you're
that
dealing
again.
with a very brutal simplicity of thought as a philosophy.
Okay.
So that idea of simplicity, I think, served us very well in the context of a very complex pitch brief. That you could get lost in very easily. When you look at it, you go very complex in terms of markets, products, brand ambitions, and I think that philosophy of ours really stood us in good stead. I think the second part of why I'd like to think we were successful was um, we didn't second guess the client. We didn't go into the room thinking what would the other agencies present or what do we think this client would like. We asked ourselves if this was our brand and our business, what would we do? um, and that's what we went in with as a solution. And I think that that's always a powerful orientation, is to go, what would you do if you had this business? Um, I think that our positive orientation and our bold stance was helpful in that we didn't go into the pitch off a position of fear or anxiety. We were excited. We said we'd love to have this business, but you know what? If we don't get it, we haven't lost anything. So I think that allows you to kind of bring a bit of ease and a bit of
Yeah,
confidence,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it emboldens you. So you can go there and say, "This is what we believe in," versus I'm trying to second guess what it is that you would want me to answer as, because I've got this anxiety around I really need to win this business, and desperation's never a good look. Um, and then I think that I think that we've been able to show up with really integrated solutions at the pitch. So to really look at the smarts of all of the companies in our group and show up as one team, with one simple solution. And I think that's really powerful because
Interesting.
in today's day and age where clients want agility and they have very busy lives with lots of different pressures and demands, um, they don't need that mirrored on the side of their communications partner.
Right.
If we can make life easier for them, that's a significant benefit. And
Interesting.
then I think we've always had this thing which we call the partner model, which is that we run quite a flat structure where we don't have deep hierarchies, and the senior people in the company, right up to and including the co-founders, are actively involved in business. We engage with clients, we go to briefing sessions, we sit in creative reviews. As I always say, if you do brilliant work for your clients and if you solve brilliantly for them, the agency and the group will largely take care of itself. It almost runs itself, almost. And I think that what was very powerful is we were able to go in the spirit of that partner model and show up as a really tight and cohesive team, where you've got high levels of seniority and expertise presented as being actively engaged in the business as a proposition, which I'd like
Interesting.
to think is very powerful.
Interesting. Wow. 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 I mean, obviously made a lot of headline.
One more thing that I thought was interesting is they did come to us through the briefing process with a very particular ambition, and we did like that. I think that we kind of I think a big part of relationships is chemistry. You got to go. Do I just even like you? Do I
Right.
feel like you have my back? Do I feel like you're passionate about my business? And when we looked at MTN, we thought, wow, what a privilege! An unbelievable success story of this. It's an African success story, but to world class standards. How it's changed the world and the lives of individuals, communities, and countries on this continent through what they've done in the world of connectivity is
Yeah.
incredible. And so,
Yeah.
I think that was something that also excited us. We kind of said, we feel like we're a brand of this continent, we're a business of this continent, like you are. We also believe in showing up in a world class way, and we love this kind of spirit of let's go grow and let's be successful. And in that, I think we also found a meeting of the minds.
Amazing. Amazing. I even listening to you now, I have a very a simple framework that I've shared with people some occasionally sometimes. I when I think about a pitch, a pitch experience or a pitch presentation, I I I strongly believe that the client wants to see three things. One is how we think as an agency, which in your case, the point you made about your creative philosophy in terms of the brutal simplicity of thought. Number two is how we execute as an agency, because a lot of times you find that sometimes strategy is great, but then when it comes to execution, it falls flat. And we see that with quite a number of agencies. So number two, how we execute, and number three, how we operate, which is where you have the partner model in terms of how you operate along those lines and things like that. So I think that even just listening to you now, you can find those different things you mentioned sitting under one of those three buckets. For agencies going to a pitch environment is how we think, how we execute, and how we operate. To be able to show that and capture that in a way that's relevant to the brand or the client at hand. So as we start to wind down and round up, because we have to, I have another two sections, but we can't take that anymore. I mean, this is already over an hour. It's not fair to you. So I wanted to go back to one of the first notes I took earlier about when we were talking about that texture of true South African sort of creativity, that true South African creative voice. How would you describe that unique creative voice or identity that South Africa or South African agencies bring, to the global stage? How would you describe that?
Look, I think that as South African, it's not totally dissimilar to a couple of other markets. I think Brazil stands out as well. But I think often, what you find in South Africa is you've got such cultural diversity, you've got such audience nuance, and in that actually a lot of tension. We're not always sitting on the same side, and we're not a kind of a black and white society. We're very rainbow, and I think that has always fueled work that reflects that texture, that reflects that energy, that has fire, that has boldness, that isn't always 100% comfortable. Um,
Yeah.
but I think sometimes it's that fire that brings that energy and drives that brilliance. And I think that for many years, as the South African industry, we've been able to show up on the global award stage with work that people would go, I love this work because it touches my soul. There's something in the energy and the spirit of this work that reflects the culture and the diversity, and the mindset and the kind of resilient attitude and spirit that we have as South Africans. And I think that has allowed us to shine on the global stage in a very distinctive way. I do feel we've lost that as an industry. Unfortunately, I think that we've become safe. I think that we've become a bit fearful. Maybe our socioeconomic and political pressure, there's pressures that we face, and just the everyday kind of hardships, that certainly corporates and businesses aren't immune to, have meant that people have felt the need to be a little bit more safe, or kind of go into the comfort zone, or even steer clear of the space of risk. Going, I, I, I don't want to be too controversial. I don't want to be put too much tension in the work because what if I get cancelled? So social media, I think playing a role there as well, unfortunately. And so I think that if we want to find our distinctive voice again on the world stage as creativity, as a creative powerhouse, I think we've got to look to the continent and go, how do we flex more as Africa, not just as South Africa? How do we flex that spirit? And I think we got to take the bold energy and the fire that we have as Africans. We're going to put that back into the work. We've got to put that back into the work. We've got to take a chance. We've got to get back to distinctive. We've got to get back to saying we want to make people fall in love with us, fall in love with our work, versus orientating around, oh my gosh, let's just not offend anyone with this work.
Right, right, right. Wow, thank you very much, Jacques. I think my final question would be, As the leader of such a big, group, I can't help but wonder how you juggle your personal life. And I wish I was asking your spouse this question actually, because you might not be
Please
giving
don't.
you might not be giving me the accurate answer. But since I have you here, I'm going to ask you. How are you able to juggle all of life's personal challenges, some of which is not of our own making. Sometimes the kids are one of the kids at the hospital, like, or maybe mother-in-law is just passed, like a bunch of different things. And I'm just curious, like, when life takes us through those moments, like, how do you manage your personal life, your personal growth, alongside building what you guys have successfully built over the last 15 years?
It's a great question. I've given up on work-life balance. I don't think that works. I don't think it's achievable. I'm going to quote Jeff Bezos because I think he puts it brilliantly. He says it's less about work-life balance; it's more about work-life harmony. And it's understanding that if I'm happy at work and if I'm successful at work, I'll probably be a better husband and a dad and a person and a friend at home. Um, if I'm a really good dad and a person at home and a good husband, then that probably means that I'll be a better person at work. And so if you can find the harmony between the two, not getting caught up in the notion that I have to find the balance today, or I have to find the balance this week, and to just be a little bit more fluid in terms of how you think about it. Um, yeah, I think when you bring it together as harmony, it starts to work. I think a big part of how you do that, of course, is to have a job that you actually enjoy doing.
Right,
I think I see a lot of people that feel really pressured in finding that balance, but it's mostly because they hate what they do at work.
right,
So every opportunity, their idea of balance is not to balance the two. Their idea is to minimize time at work so they can maximize time in life. And I'm going, if you really enjoy both of those, you can find a blend. I do think that what helps as well are understanding partners that you need to surround yourself with. So I have an amazing wife who's incredibly understanding, and that is certainly helpful. I also have partners in the business that understand. As you said, my child's sick or needs to go to the doctor. I'm not working for Elon Musk. I've got people that say, I get that. You can off you go. We'll see you when we see you. And I think having that understanding is important. And then I think you as an individual need to understand the career that you choose, because different careers come with different pressures. So there are many careers that offer an 8 to 5 job. And what I've had to understand is that this career that I've chosen um, is not an 8 to 5 job. It comes with after hours work. It comes with strange times. It comes with a Saturday afternoon phone call. It comes with you can't go on holiday and just never read your emails for 2 weeks. That's not this job. So, as a mate of mine who's a surgeon once said to me, you can't be a surgeon and be squeamish of blood. It comes with the territory. And so I think, when you consider how you want to do work-life balance, you've also got to, figure out and appreciate the industry that you're in. But if you love what you're doing and you can make it more about harmony than balance, and you've got the right partners that can help to support you in that, and sometimes call you out, as my wife
right.
does from time to time. She says, enough now. This thing is way out of control. Get back to the center. That's also important.
Wow, amazing. Amazing. Thank you very much, Jacques. I think that this has been a very, I mean, we didn't get, I think we got through about 70% of our questions, but, some other time we will, I think we did a great job to cover up those elements. Um, Thank you. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversations. I think there's a lot of gems and actionable, tips, which is always very important to me with the podcast. Is I want people first to listen and leave with something meaningful, something deeper than work, which I think that we've been able to do, and also then walk away with very actionable things that they can put to work in their work, in their business, in their lives. and hopefully see some results. And I think that we checked all of those boxes. So thank you very much, Jacques. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate you coming on the podcast. I don't know if you have any last words, at least for the podcast.
I thoroughly enjoyed the chat. Yes, I think you covered about 70% of the questions, so maybe we can do a chat or two. But yeah, thanks very much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much, Jacques. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. It's been an incredible episode.